before she began working on her doctorate at the University of Georgia. She earned both a bachelor's and a master's degrees in agricultural science and agricultural education. Makes her a nice fit for our teachers here. She's been a winner of multiple awards, including the 2014 Mary Garland Early Career Fellowship at UW and the National Science Foundation Early Career Award in 2013, as well as the Distance Education Best Practices Award. And for those of you who don't know, Best Practices is a cool new moniker that education types use, so it's a nice award. Tonia's area of expertise is in the use of digital tools in education. In particular, she investigates teaching techniques that place the students rather than the teacher at the center of the educational experience. And she also looks at the use of technology to assist that. She has researched learner-centered pedagogical design, the use of video game design software in the classroom, especially to be used by the students rather than the teacher. And she has experimented with Google Glass as a teaching device. Given that Google Glass sort of has been pulled off, I'd be interested to see what the results of that research was. And she's also worked with the building and programming of small robots by students. And it's on this last area of expertise that Dr. Dousay will speak to us today in a talk titled Teaching with Robots, Math and Science. Dr. Dousay.
Thank you. Now, if you would please humor me for a moment, I promised both my mom and my high school English teacher, Mrs. Mays, that I would take a picture of the audience, so feel free to wave. Thank you. As Paul mentioned, I am actually very involved with Google. I'm a Google certified teacher. I've gotten to go behind closed doors. It's a very awesome experience. Google Glass isn't dead. They're just reinventing it. One of the issues we found, I could give my Google Glass to my students and they could kill the battery in less than an hour. Not really useful. So, we're not going to talk about Google Glass. We're going to talk about robotics. Robots have fascinated us for decades. Anybody know when the Jetsons started? In the 60s. Anybody ever want to build a robot? I totally did. So we're going to kind of go back. I'm going to connect this to an earlier talk. Downton Abbey got brought up. My mom's family was very much the Downton Abbey family in England. My mom was very much the Sybil, if you're a fan. She was the black sheep. She totally encouraged me to explore science fiction and to build. She's the one who taught me how to use tools in the garage to make whatever I wanted to build. But what if you could have played with robots in the classroom? Might that have changed your career trajectory? A little bit? A lot? Because it makes a difference when this is what you get to play with in the classroom. Now, I have to be very careful. These are tools, not toys. But the ability to engage, now we'll kind of connect back to what Dr. Griffin was talking about, when you are engaged in something. He mentioned the neural net that can map out and talk about what's happening when all of your senses are involved. Well, now you're in the classroom, and you're going to be looking at mathematics concepts. Some familiar equations or calculations there? When we talk about common mathematics, what are we talking about? And they didn't tell you this, but I actually ask you to participate. This is a conversation. So when we're talking about math, what are we talking about? Numbers. Counting. So let's start off in the little grades, kindergarten, first grade, third grade. We're talking about counting, learning what our numbers are, that 6 comes before 7, and then 8, 9, 10. And then as we keep going, we're getting into 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. What does math look like? Percentages, fractions, decimals, algebra. Don't we love fractions? You love fractions, don't you? Now let me rephrase that. Who likes pizza? Now we really love fractions. And that's a great point, because chemistry and cooking are the same thing. But we don't make those connections for students. I got to make peanut brittle once. Otherwise, I made slime or I blew something up in the chemistry lab. Science and math are very theoretical. And that's what we teach. But we have to have that theory in order to be able to apply it. But when you have these numbers, you have a test. The teacher wants you to multiply 4 by 8. Now, what if you had an applied example instead of a multi-choice test? What if you were able to play with a robot and write a line of code and you had to determine how to solve a maze, how to avoid an obstacle, and you have to know how far the robot has to travel, how long it needs to travel, and what's the difference between going 1 mile and 1.5 miles? We're throwing in some fractions and decimals. Now, what about if we get into high school math? What are we talking about? Geometry, equations and formulas, and what does this mean? Just yesterday, I've been working with a group of lab school students there on campus at UW, and one of the girls, 7th grade math, she looked at me and said, "What's the formula for the circumference of a circle?" Not pi r square. 2 pi r. 2 pi r. Thankfully I remembered on the fly. So I was her hero in the moment. She was trying to work on a problem for another class. But we're thinking theoretical. Now, what if you had a robot and you were trying to figure out how to make the robot travel in a circle? I need that equation. Now, I will put in a plug that it is March 14th, 2015 coming up. It's the most magical Pi Day that we've had. Had to put in that plug. But what else goes with robots? And that's computational thinking. Any guesses what computational thinking entails? Logic. Others? Problem solving. Critical thinking, troubleshooting. We're talking about higher order levels of thinking. So we go from, if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, we're talking about remembering. So I know that 1 comes before 4. But we need to get from the bottom of just remembering to the top of creating, evaluating, and turning something new. So I mentioned earlier, what if I wanted my robot here, and his name is Dash. Please meet Dash. You will get to play with him. Dash will talk back. Why would I want him to go in a circle?
So he doesn't just hit a wall and stay there.
Anybody ever see the movie Runaway in the 80s with Tom Selleck? Or seen some of what's happening with remote bomb detonation? Bomb squads. They have to control robots. So they have to be able to get the robot from point A to point B and defuse a bomb. How about industrial distribution? Been in a warehouse lately? Most of the loading and unloading is managed by robots. Here's one. Anybody had surgery with a robot lately? Tell us about it. Do you mind? Would you mind sharing a little bit? Do you know what robot it was?
It was laparoscopic surgery and robots.
The Vinci Robot?
Not sure what it was, but I know it was less invasive than the alternative.
Yes, very, very much so. And honestly, I would be in the camp who would trust the steady hands of a robot being controlled by a human more so than my hands shaking, trying to make sure that I make the right incision. It's a part of life, but somebody had to get us here. So somebody had the forethought ahead of time to get us to where we are now. How do we get our students and our kids and our grandkids and our nieces and nephews to the next generation with really fun hands-on stuff like robotics? Robotics are the true interdisciplinary area right now in a lot of classrooms. Now, in my introduction, you heard that I came from agricultural education. I get a lot of funny looks. How did I make that leap? Agricultural education was the original hands-on interdisciplinary field, and it still is. it was also the field that brought a lot of technology. How many ranchers and cattlemen do I have in the audience? Anybody? How much technology do you use? Any? What's available to you? Tractors? And a lot of people don't. When you have a large-scale operation, when you have plants rather than herds, for herd management, you might use a lot of software to keep up with what you've got with your herd, with your immunization. But then when you start looking at crop production, GPS positioning to control your irrigation system, you can use your iPhone while you're in a meeting or hanging out with the family and set the timer to change your irrigation system. Ag brought a lot of technological advances, and that's where I got involved in it, and I started seeing some really cool ways that we could use technology. And then I found myself firmly in instructional technology. So I was able to marry technology with learning. But you can see some of the examples I have on screen. Technology, science, engineering, ethics. Why would I talk about ethics? Bioethics. There's a really great researcher at the University of Wyoming by the name of Dr. Jeff Clune. He's actually working in artificial intelligence with robots. Phenomenal researcher. Ethics is a consideration. Ethics is something I talk about with our pre-service teachers because we need to have ethical leaders for the future. Art. Why would I bring up art? Design, aesthetic design. You go to the grocery store. You're choosing some carrots or some peppers. One is shriveled and not the right shade, but it's perfectly fine and edible. But the other is beautiful and crisp and has a bright color. Which one do you grab? There's a lot of research in the art and the aesthetic side. So if we want to design a robot, there are different robots. So I mentioned that this is Dash. Dash has a partner. This is Dot. There are other robots, and you'll see some pictures of some that are more crude. So you have to fit the design and the purpose of the robot to what it's going to be doing. So art comes into play. How about language arts? This is a fun one. Why does English and language arts matter? Communicating with the robot. The number one issue that I run into with kids when they're working on programming, they misspelled something. Now for the more seasoned techies in the group, you might recognize the phrase syntax error does not compute. All because you had a misplaced letter, or you misread an L as a 1, or vice versa. So language arts and English are important. You've got to be able to actually spell and type. Now, what if you wanted to write out a full program, or you need to write up a report for your robot? Comes into play. Media literacy. Anybody familiar with this as a concept or a field? You want to share?
Media literacy is something that we try to push as a core literacy element that all college students should have, and that this is as strong as just information literacy and as strong as literacy in reading and writing.
Absolutely. Media literacy is near and dear to my heart. I emphasize it in all of my classes. I'm working with the UW libraries to implement the Common Sense media literacy curriculum at the university level. Media literacy also involves determining, I have a task. Which robot do I use? Troubleshooting. Now, something that I run into a lot with students, it really does come into play with technology. Anybody self-identify as being technologically savvy? Anybody self-identify as not being technologically savvy? I'm going to teach you the same mantra that I teach my students. You are as savvy as you need to be. You know what you need to know, when you need to know it, how you need to know it. What happens when you don't know something that you need to know? You find out. You go look it up. You ask a friend. You might do a Google search. You might go look for a video that shows you how to do something. You're as savvy as you need to be. And then last but not least, mathematics and history. Now here's another last one, history. Why do I mention history? What do we often say about history? That if we forget it, we're doomed to repeat it. But not only that, we document, back to language arts, the process we went through to create this little guy. That helps us with the next iteration and the next iteration. So it involves all kinds of aspects of history. So we've talked a little bit about what it is we're talking about. You want to know what's going on in Wyoming, right? That's why we're here. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in Wyoming. Right now, there are 2 primary competitions that occur in the state of Wyoming. This first logo in the upper left side of the screen here is the first Lego League. Wouldn't you love to play with Legos in school? I so wish they had this when I was It's not fair. So First Lego League is actually one of the biggest competitions. Kendall Jacobs out of Casper is the coordinator for First Lego League. And he has a dilemma. More than 60 teams in the state of Wyoming descend on Casper in December. And he has to turn more teams away because he can only accommodate 60. Isn't that a cool problem to have? Absolutely. We're such a spread out state. But there's other states that don't even have the participation that we do. This is awesome. So Kendall's actually looking at changing up that model and having regional competitions where the champions then advance to the state finals. So the difference between First Lego League, and I'm about to mention the second one, is First Tech League. First Lego League is actually a state competition, and it's 9 to 14-year-olds. He's looking at doing 4 regions. First Lego League is also not so much a competition against other students, but you're given a problem statement that you have to address. First Tech League is for the older student. That one is for 13 to 18-year-old students. Championships were just a couple weeks ago. A little bit of a different project. This time you are competing against other students, and you're not using Legos. You're using more of the metal materials to build robots and solve problems. Down here in the corner, I have Laramie Robotics Club. This is actually just an example of what's happening around the state. Communities, citizens want this for their children, for their nieces and nephews, for their grandchildren. In this case, this was a father in Albany County who said, hey, I want to have a robotics club. I want my kid to learn programming. Who do I talk to? He hooked up with Dr. Jeff Clune, I mentioned earlier, and they said, we can do this. So Jeff and his graduate students have created a weekly club with little labs that students can work through. And we'll take a look at some pictures of those in a minute. In the center, you see UW. The Science and Mathematics Technology Center is actually working on the iTest grant for UGame and iCompute. Now I'm going to switch real quick so I can mention all of the counties in this grant because it was an NSF grant, so they had to focus their participation. But they're working with Albany 1, Carbon 1, Fremont 14, Fremont 25, Laramie 1, Natrona, Park 1, and Washakie 1. In this grant are researchers and grad students. One of my own grad students, actually, Carla Hester-Croft, she's at Western Wyoming Community College. She's participating in this grant. They work with teachers to develop lesson plans that can then be used in the classroom to play with these things, which, by the way, we will get to play with these. They let students design the robots. They let the students design games. So in my introduction, it was mentioned that that's my focus. I don't need to stand up here and talk to you. That's no fun. It's a lot more fun if you get to do the work. But I'm here to guide you. I'm here to answer your questions and to help redirect you if you're not headed down the path that I need you to be on. And that's what these projects do. Now, it would be a terrible mistake if I didn't bring this home to Teton and Jackson. Anybody know about the Robronx? There's some awesome work being done here. Kathy Milburn and Gary Duquette work with the robotics team, and I have been chatting with them about some ways that we can get the university active and showcase what Jackson is doing because it's a great model. So let's take a look at some specific examples. Every Wednesday from 4 to 6, I go hang out in the engineering building on campus with Dr. Clune and his graduate students. Roby is the lead graduate student who wrote the labs. And these are students that I see every week. You can see that their robot looks vastly different than Dash up here on the stage. It's a very simple robot with a motherboard on the back of it. Uses Bluetooth connectivity. So the students actually program in Python using Calico. They write the command lines, they execute it. It transmits that program to the robot. We have so much fun every week. I cannot tell you. They have timed competitions. So we've taken trifold poster boards, and Roby has taken black electrical tape and made mazes. And the students have to solve the maze in the fastest time. And if you beat the record, you get to name the maze, or rename the maze. Bragging rights are involved. The kids get so into it. Last week, not this past Wednesday, the Wednesday before, Roby unveiled a new simulation he wrote. So instead of just learning to drive the robot forward and backwards in a simple on-screen simulator, he wrote a game simulator. So the students learn how to do their basic commands: forward, backwards, left, and right, speed and duration, go into the command line. But they have to get through a simulation that has fireballs going across it. That's the simple simulation. The complex simulation is a maze with chompers that drop down. Very Mario-like. But the chompers are smart because the chompers have sensors. And if the robot is near it, it will speed up and change its timing. So you can't just watch the screen and try to go, okay, they're 3 seconds apart. It's not Indiana Jones and you're trying to jump. I watched as 2 newcomers came in that week to play with the simulators. And they were so proud when they discovered that they could beat the first simulation in less than 100th of a second. Unfortunately, the way it was written, it only showed you up to 100, so it looked like they beat it in 0 time. But that made a great conversation because they were like, oh, I beat it. I gotta tell Roby. So we get Roby to come over, he high-fives them, and then we stop and say, okay, but did you really do it in 0 time? No. What does it mean? So what are your guesses? Maybe 1,000th of a second? Or a couple of hundredths of a second? The clock is rounding up, but the numbers are below the roundup, so it's going to display 0, 0. So now we get back to their basic math, even though that wasn't the point. They do this every week, the kids come back, barring bad weather. That's the only time I've ever seen it with low attendance. We're to the point now that we have so many kids and not enough volunteers. So I come in with the education perspective, and I try to bring the undergraduates, the students who want to be teachers, so that they can help, and they can help with the troubleshooting. And while we may not be the programmers, we may not be able to write a simulation, we still can help them with the problem solving and the troubleshooting and what went wrong and how can we get this right. But they have so much fun. In this picture, I have to point out, this is Charlotte. She's a large black spider robot. And of course, the Robronx. So Kathy sent me a link that I wanted to play for you to show you one of the robots that the students at Jackson High built. But here's where I go back to the interdisciplinary part, the media literacy. The students created this. They had to be ethical. They had to find music that they wouldn't violate copyright. They had to use the software to create the video, to put it together. They used probably a cell phone to film it. So it's more than just the robots. It's the big picture. It's everything else they're doing. So with that, you can see Dash and Dot. Over here are Sphero and Ollie. There are other robots that are being used in classrooms. And here's a really fun fact. Anybody heard of Kickstarter? A lot of these are Kickstarter projects. Somebody had a great idea. but this is the 21st century, and this is the crowdsourcing century. You have a great idea and you want to get it to market, so you can now use Kickstarter to get products like this off the ground. But it's time to play. Anybody want to play? I'm going to show you real quick what it looks like when students get to use Dash. So this is a very simple program called Go, and it would let me simply just control Dash and drive him around like a remote control car. So this would let me drive him. Now before I hit the button, we're going to decrypt this together. The first command says when top button. And then that's going to make Dash say hi. Now I could actually change this. I can tap on it and we can make him say wee. I can change the colors on Dash. So if you can tell, and if you're at the back, I'll hold him up real quick. He's got these little colored spots on him. We can actually tell it to change that to a specific color. So maybe we want it to be yellow. And then we're going to go 40 forward normal. So I mentioned earlier duration and speed, pretty common in programming. So we could change it to be faster or slower. We could make him go really slow, fast, for less than 40 or more than 40. And then maybe change his colors again. This time we're going to go to blue. And at the end, he's going to say ta-da. So let's see what he does. Change to yellow. He went forward, backwards. Now we're blue. Ta-da! Dash is just one example and is more complex. You can drag and drop. So you can actually play, and there's other commands. Maybe I wanted to have him look up. So we're going to do that at the end. And then we execute. And then he tilted up. He's going to do exactly what we tell him to do because we're programming him. But for those of you who know programming and coding, would this have helped you early on? For those who don't, would this get you interested? And that's where my heart is. How do we get students interested? We've got to get them past the first hurdle, and then a whole new world opens up. Speaking of a whole new world, this is what's called a Little Bits kit. Anybody heard of these? They are awesome. So we'll see if I can open it without spilling all the contents. Circuits. Connections. This is actually the Little Bits music kit. We're going to put together a synthesizer in a minute. I think David's going to assist me.
I am.
You are. These actually come with a great little booklet for teachers, for learners, for parents, and you can go through it. So we're going to take a look at some of the pages in here. We're going to tie back into Dr. Griffith's presentation. What is sound? So now we're pulling the science of sound into a technical classroom setting. And it actually gives you some breakdowns. You can see low pitch waves, high pitch waves. It'll walk you through the different modules that go into building this with illustrations and instructions. It'll introduce you to each part, and they're color-coded. So, got to have a power source, right? On, off, battery, connector. So let's put it together. Now I've got a power source. Endless possibilities at this moment. It's up to me what direction we're going to go into. Now, the other nice thing about these booklets, well, it also talks about the colors. So blue, as you can see, I mentioned color-coded as power. Input components. All of these are pink for input. Output, green. Nice little speaker. And then other wiring. So this is a split harness if I wanted to have multiple inputs. Wiring is orange. The other beautiful part about Little Bits, they are magnetic. So, I'm going to start off with my power. I want to add the keyboard. It doesn't matter if I'm 5 or if I'm 50. It can only go in one way. It doesn't want. Magnets are awesome, aren't they? So it helps me learn the right way to put it in. So I've got my power. I have one of my input components is a keyboard. We're going to add in an oscillator, and they're even numbered. So I can look at it, and I'm going to hand some of these out, just so you know that I'm not fibbing. It has tiny writing at the top that actually tells you what the component is. And I'll take the oscillator back because I need it. So I'm going to add the oscillator in right here. So let's see if I can hold it all up together. They're all connected. Now I need an output. I need a speaker. So if my lovely assistant Dave would come up. Okay. So let's see where we can set this where it's easy to play with. Maybe up here. Put all the parts together.
So that's the keyboard right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So just
And
plug that in right
this
there.
Goes
This is
right
where
there?
a learner gets to experience.
Does it go the other? Ah, okay.
See how it snaps in?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's our power switch. You want to turn it on?
Right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I'll see if I can get my microphone over here by it, but you can tweak it and play with it. So here's the oscillator, here's your volume, and there's your keys. So it's making clicking sounds.
Volume. Okay. Can I turn it up?
Hear the static?
It's hard to.
And now I've created a monster. Thank you, Dave. So I stand between you and lunch. But now's your chance to ask me questions or come up here and play with some of this. Or come see me at lunch and play with it.
So are these similar to snap circuits?
Yes.
Bigger kit version?
Yes, very similar to snap circuits. There's all kinds of kits. The Sparkfun Inventor Kid is another one that's out on the market right now. A lot of these kits are priced reasonably well, but it's still a challenge for teachers. Now, thankfully, Congress is bringing back the Enhancing Education through Technology Act. Funding is being put back into that so that schools can buy this equipment, can pay for the professional development for teachers, which I will be remiss if I do not mention if you're just curious what's going on in the world of teachers in Wyoming. And you're on Twitter. Any Sunday night, 8 p.m., you can join us for the Wyo Ed Chat. Just watch and see what we're talking about. Last week, we were talking about curriculum and standards. This week, I'm actually co-hosting the Ed Chat with Ed Olson from the Wyoming Department of Education, and we'll be talking about enhancing education through technology. We'll be asking questions about what do the districts see that they need, and how can the university and the WDE support them in this professional development effort. There's other ways that you can get funding for projects like this. Donors Choose is kind of like the Kickstarter for teachers. A friend of mine in Sheridan, Jordan O'Donnell, anybody watch NPR or listen to Marketplace Learning Curve? Catch the recent story about juvenile justice education? If you check the Learning Curve website, there was a great piece. NPR came into Sheridan and featured the fantastic work that Mr. Jordan O'Donnell is doing up there, working with girls at the girls' school, creating a makerspace, teaching them programming and coding, giving them a skill set so that when they leave the juvenile justice system, they have skills and they're not behind their peers when they get back out into the world. I worked with Jordan to connect him with some folks in Minneapolis. We're trying to see about getting them a metal 3D printer that they can have at the school. But he's been doing great work with programming and coding. He needed some Sparkfun kits. So he created a profile on Donors Choose, listed the project, the cost of the kits, how much it would be, had 3 donors. One of those donors heard the story and paid about 60% of the cost, that one person. The cool thing about Donors Choose, while I'm not taking anything away from our fine folks at the foundation, because I can't use Donors Choose, I have to work with these guys. If you want to support your local schools, your teachers can create profiles, can put out there the project they want to do, you can help fund it, then the teacher and the students write you thank you letters and send you pictures about what they've done. But if you want to support my work helping the schools, these fine gentlemen can help you. Other questions?
What is the evidence as to whether this new kind of technology makes any difference in our overall national low standards of learning in math and science? Is this just a fun thing that doesn't make a difference, or is there actually evidence that it's actually improving our status?
It is, and there is evidence. I have a fantastic colleague at BYU, Dr. Peter Rich, who is looking at robotics and programming and actually assessing the learning that occurs, the deeper learning and the programming, and he's starting to look at some of the longevity aspects. Because it's one thing to say, oh, I'm going to teach you how to do this today. Standardized testing wants to measure you tomorrow, but I need to know, can you succeed when you get to college? Can you succeed when you get to a career? And there is evidence. Unfortunately, those take time. Robotics and programming have really kind of exploded on the education scene in the last 5 to 6 years. So I look for a lot more hard data on this, probably in another 5 to 6 years. But we are seeing some increased interest in other subjects. Students who were once disengaged now pay attention because they're finding application in the classroom after playing with robots in a club outside of the class.
How many children are involved through the lab school in your robotics?
And the robotics club in Laramie isn't just the lab school. Most of our students actually come from the other schools in Albany County. In any given week, we will have no less than 20 kids in the room. There are a core group of about 6 that come every week, and others kind of migrate in and out. And we're trying to expand it. We need more space. We've kind of maxed out the capacity of that computer lab.
What's the ratio of adult to children?
Between parent volunteers, faculty volunteers, and grad students, we usually have at least a dozen adults in the room with these 20 or so kids.
Okay, classroom teacher.
No classroom teacher can manage that. And that's one of the reasons why these are successful as after-school clubs versus in-classroom activities.
And what's the ratio of boys to girls in the program?
Thank you, Amy. That's a wonderful question. Jeff has actually tasked me with that aspect, and when we do get a new girl in the club, he asks me to work with them. I mentioned art earlier. I had one gal last semester. She wasn't interested in programming the robot to move from point A to point B, but she did learn the pen up and pen down feature of programming. So we drew SpongeBob on screen. Unfortunately, we're lucky if we have 2 girls every week. Yeah, it breaks my heart. On the flip side, I'm working with a group of girls in the lab school on a design elective that is more fashion design, which you wouldn't think has any math involved, right? Au contraire. One of the activities I did with these ladies was to give them ceramic tiles. Each girl got 4 tiles, and we had a bunch of dry erase markers on the table. And I said, draw me a pattern on each tile. You can replicate the pattern, or you can have different patterns on each tile. And now let's move them and see what happens to our pattern. Now let's flip the tile up and see what happens to our pattern. I was trying to get them thinking about 2-dimensional design versus 3-dimensional design. And I was working with 3 girls at the table, and I said, okay, what is the dreaded 4-letter word we're not saying? One of my girls yelled, math! And another gal yelled, I love math! And I thought, oh, honey, please never lose that attitude. Because math is fun, and there are ways that you can apply it and make it engaging. For some girls, they want something like fashion design. For others, I want to be in the garage. I want to be tinkering with tools, and I've got the measuring tape out, and I'm cutting, and I'm building something. Because my mom instilled that in me.
I was just thinking there's got to be internet communities that are probably broken down into subgroups of grade levels and gender levels that that anybody ought to be able to get into and do this kind of stuff.
There's tons of communities out there. There's tons of movements. Anybody hear about Goldie Blocks? It was a big movement to help get girls involved. There's a a huge debate roaring in the field whether you do what they call girlify or go gender neutral and not care. I'm more in the not care camp, but I recognize that some children need their own personal interest for motivation. So there's a balance in the middle there. But there are a lot of communities that break it down by grade level. There's a lot of great resources for teachers that help them with implementing these types of lessons. And you can even go a step further and help them with satisfying any district requirements for standards reporting. So why am I using this activity in my classroom? Well, it ties back to this standard.
What's the range of ages in your lab?
In the Laramie Robotics Club, we've had as young as 6, not as successful. They just got to drive the robots and draw circles on a wide, dry erase board, and as old as 18. The typical age range is usually at 8 or 9 years old to 18. We've even had a few college students come in who were curious.
How has the State Department of Education and maybe even the legislature interacted or responded to this instructional technique?
I don't know that I've seen an official response. At the same time, we are developing a lot of stronger ties with the WDE, with the new administration, so we're trying to look at better ways that we can work with the schools and how can we better get this into the school if it is working, or if it's not, what else can we do? At the end of January, I got to host a Google Hangout on air with Jillian below, and she expressed a deep interest in communicating closer with the districts on ways that we can get this into more schools who don't have it. And obviously she has a better chance of bending the legislature's ear than I do.
Can you talk about your work with Makerspace, please?
Thank you, Tyler. This last year, I was able to establish a makerspace. Anybody familiar with that phrase? Makerspaces are part of what we call the maker movement. It's been around for the better part of 10 years. There are maker fairs held around the world. There are 2 flagship maker fairs held in the United States, one in the Bay Area and one in New York. There's also going to be a maker fair here in Jackson in May, hosted by the Teton Science School. Hoping to bring some of our projects from Laramie up here to display for that maker fair. Makerspaces are hands-on. Let's make something. Instead of just talking about a project, let's actually do a project. So I mentioned the girls with the ceramic tiles. That is a project being run through my makerspace. Every Friday, I volunteer an hour of my time and I go teach a class in the lab school. I work with these 11 girls. We talk about design in different aspects, and it's a project-based activity. These girls have been partnered up with students, undergraduates, in family and consumer science who have to design garments for a fashion show. But here's the twist. The lab school girls are designing what to print onto the fabric. We have a fabric printer. Dr. Erin Eyrich in Family and Consumer Sciences has a fabric printer. She has 7 different types of fabric, anything from cotton to sheer and everything in between. You load the bolt onto the printer and you can print your designs. So my lab school girls are designing what do they want on the fabric. Our undergraduates are designing what to make with the fabric. On May 9th in the family room in the Union at UW is the end of year fashion show. Family and Consumer Science did this last year. They're doing it again this year. They're featuring this project. Our girls will get to walk the runway in the outfits that they have designed with their counterpart who designed the outfit for themselves as well. Another project that I'm running through the makerspace because I have a 3D printer. It's very much like the printer here in the Fab Lab. Anybody know Miss Sammy Smith? Fantastic teacher. I'm a little biased. She's one of our master students. Sammy worked very closely with me when I wanted to establish a makerspace. So earlier it was mentioned that I was a recipient of the Mary Garland Early Career Fellowship. I wrote my proposal for that fellowship to establish this makerspace. I worked with Sammy. She wrote me a letter of cooperation. When she had a group of Jackson students come down to Laramie last spring, I sat down with them and said, okay guys, you've been playing in this makerspace for a year now. Tell me what I need to know. What software works, what software doesn't work, what equipment works, what equipment doesn't work. So your Jackson Hole students built my makerspace. They told me what needed to be in there because they were the hands-on learners. They could tell me what worked and didn't work. So now I'm working with Mr. Heath Brown at Laramie Junior High. His students in the engineering elective have to design boats. Oftentimes we've done this activity ourselves in school. We might have used foil, maybe cardboard. The students are going to design their boats with their traditional materials. We're taking pictures of these from all sides. We're pulling them into AutoCAD and Tinkercad, and we will 3D print them. And then they have to test the difference between the materials. So now we're getting into physics. It's not just basic science. These are the kinds of activities that can be done as projects in a makerspace. Projects can help get children and any learner of any age interested in an area and want to learn more about it. Thank you, Tyler.